Well, good morning, folks, and welcome to the Senate Ag Committee. Um, we'll run around and introduce ourselves, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, Ryan Collmore representing the Rutland District. Good to see you, Katie and Ryan.
Hi, Irene Renner, Chittenden North, which includes Fairfax.
Brian Campion, Bennington County, great to see all of you, and I see Evie's there now too.
Oh, yeah.
Rich Westman, Whale County.
And Bobby Starr from Orleans County, and welcome to our meeting this morning. Um, we invited you folks to talk a little bit about the bill that I believe has passed the House in Washington, HR 1147, which would allow for whole milk or 2% milk to be used in our school lunch program. And we talked for years about trying to increase the percentage of butterfat in our milk in our schools because children, we had testimony just this year, a month or so ago, how they're using milk dispensers so that the children only take a small amount of, because they were throwing their little cartons away half full. And so now they're having a dispenser and only taking a half a glass of milk instead of a full glass. And so they have a lot less waste. And was wondering from our Senate colleagues in DC, what your thoughts about that and the prospects of possibly getting that passed this year. So I don't know who wants to lead off, if it's Katie or Ryan, but welcome to hear your thoughts in regards to that House bill.
So I'm actually happy to let Ryan take the lead on this simply because his boss is on the Committee of Jurisdiction on the Agriculture Committee. So Ryan, if you probably have the most up-to-date knowledge from the Senate Ag Committee's perspective. So if you want to jump in, I'm more than happy to defer to you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Ryan McLaren.
Hi.
Senior advisor for Peter Welch. And Senator Starr, you're referring to the whole milk for Healthy Kids Act, which did pass the House in December. There was an effort to pass it in the Senate, close to when it passed in the House by unanimous consent, which, as you all know, is difficult to achieve in any legislative body. So that didn't happen. And the real reason it didn't happen is there's a strong desire to see anything related to the USDA in general to wait and move through the Farm Bill. And the latest on the Farm Bill is we're not sure. There are fits and starts every few months about whether or not we'll be able to move it in this Congress, or we will just continue to extend it into next year in the way we have in previous farm bills. I think the last farm bill, it took us 6 or 7 years to actually write a new one when it's a 5-year bill. And there's still some hope because the chair of the Agriculture Committee is retiring this year. And it's certainly her strong desire to rewrite the Farm Bill, which in Congress has passed. It's been, I think, bipartisan success story, one of the few we have often in Congress where we need bipartisan support to pass it, and people can come together and actually kind of negotiate in good faith and get something done. So we're still holding out hope on that. I will say, you know, we've never passed the bill on the House side. It wasn't like I wasn't necessarily expecting it. So in terms of Peter's a co-sponsor of the bill, and in terms of possibility of success, we're in as good a place now as we've ever been, and making it happen. And I think, whole milk's in schools important for, I think, for kids. There's an ongoing debate about nutrition science, which I think will be part of the conversation we have in the Farm Bill, and part of a holistic conversation about what we're feeding kids in schools. But that's certainly a conversation we welcome. And I think the way Peter thinks about this particular bill is it's another way of reconnecting our school meals to our local agriculture system, in farm to school, and shortening the loop between the food that's produced and the food we're feeding kids in our schools. And certainly this would do that, has the potential to do that in Vermont. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. And I know Senator Sanders has the same feeling about farm to school programs here in Vermont, strong supporter. And so, we welcome that conversation in any form we can get it.
So, has the Senate voted on this?
No, we haven't voted on it, other than to sort of, people did not consent in the unanimous consent process that happened in December that Senator Marshall led. He tried to have it passed by unanimous consent, and there were objections. So it's basically been referred to, it's still in committee, and the normal committee process has to proceed, and that will proceed in a way that's sort of inclusive of all the other Farm Bill priorities. So yeah, they shot their shot to get it done, and it didn't happen. I do think, it's a bipartisan bill. It passed in a extremely bipartisan way in the House. So like, if we can vote on it, it feels like it can pass. It's more, it's just tied up in a bigger conversation about the Farm Bill.
Yeah, Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ryan, I'm just curious if you could articulate some of the reasons why folks would not support this in the upper chamber there.
I think the opposition is around school nutrition and sort of healthy school lunch as a whole. And I think there's been an ongoing debate about the role of, I think, fat in general in that conversation since the 90s. And the science is sort of changing, and the understanding about what's healthy, what's not healthy, I think is evolving every day. And it's, from my perspective, moving back towards like whole milk being seen as a net positive and not a net negative. But it is part of a broader sort of conversation about the food we feed kids in schools, which in some Vermont schools is like restaurant quality and amazing and locally sourced. And that is not necessarily the case across the country. And so, folks have a genuine and real interest in making sure kids that they represent are given the healthiest meals possible in schools, because they know, like we know, that that's the only place some kids eat. And so it's really, really important that they get like a nutritious, complete meal there. I believe, and I think this bill is sort of expressing that whole milk can and should be part of that potentially, or at least kids should be given the choice to have it. And so, I'm quite encouraged by what happened in the House that if we can make something happen in the Senate on this too.
Thank you.
So, Katie, is there, how are things in your office, in regards to this?
Yeah, thank you for asking. And for the record, Katie Van Hayes, State Director for Senator Sanders. I think, everything Ryan shared is right on. This is because that request to pass the bill unanimously did not pass, which is pretty common, to be honest, in the Senate. It just moves through the typical committee process. It's always helpful for us to hear from Vermonters about bills. It's really important to Bernie that he understands what Vermonters are thinking about bills that are going through the Senate. It helps inform him and his decision making. I will say that one of the other pieces that we anticipate happening this year as well is that we do anticipate the USDA to come out with updated nutrition guidelines. And so as that happens, that can also help to inform this bill, because as Ryan alluded to, and as I'm sure this committee knows very well, there's a very long history of how we have thought about nutrition standards in this country, a really long history around how we have thought about fat in a pretty sort of elementary way, but we haven't had the same conversations around sugar. I think probably what is true in my daughter's school is likely true in a lot of schools around Vermont, which is that milk, we do not have whole milk, but we do have chocolate milk that has quite a bit of sugar in it. I'll just share a personal anecdote that it used to be that when my daughter got school lunch, I could see whether she was picking the non-chocolate milk or the chocolate milk, and now we can't tell anymore. I always like to be able to know what choice she was making. And I think a lot of parents probably feel the same way. So I do think that this conversation around even just, good fats, healthy fats, and more unhealthy saturated fats, we know there's differences between an avocado and whole dairy and some of the other fats that are in our foods right now, the more highly processed ones. So I think all of this is part of that broader conversation. Certainly from the senator's position as chair of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, both on the education side, but also on the health side, he has really seen what is happening in our schools around nutrition, but also around activity for our kids. We're having a whole conversation right now in Vermont and all over the country about access to physical education, and all of these things kind of from the senator's perspective tie together in terms of making sure that we create a school environment where our students can be as active and healthy as possible.
Yeah, last year, both the Senate Ag and Senate Education worked together and put together the Universal Meals Program. And I know in Ag, we were pushing pretty hard to get that done, and along with Brian Campion and his committee in education. And so we had a lot of hot lunch people in, and we never asked, I don't think, a direct question, but the milk often would come up in conversation, and from the hot lunch agents in regards to students not liking the low fat content in milk, and growing up on a farm, milk was a main thing especially at lunchtime and dinner time, and there was other reasons why. I think there are many other reasons besides what they drink, why they children sometimes get overweight and things, and lack of exercise, lack of work, and milk's a pretty as far as I know, it's a pretty wholesome product. And has there ever been any talk down there about letting individual states determine whether they use whole milk or watered down milk?
I like the phrasing. I'm not aware of that. We could probably have our policy staff in DC do a little bit of digging on that. Certainly, as Ryan mentioned, farm to school and ensuring that states have the ability to prioritize locally sourced food has been something that, this delegation has a really long history of fighting for and will continue to do so. But to my knowledge, there hasn't been a discussion around having states select individual nutrition standards. So I think that would be something we would have to look into. But I do appreciate you mentioning the universal school meals piece. That was something that I know, from Senator Sanders' perspective, we really would have preferred to have be a federal policy that continued. We saw the tremendous positive impact that has had for students all across the country, the impact on low-income students, but also the impact on just what having a universally acceptable, available, accessible school meal means for all students. So we greatly appreciate Vermont's leadership in making sure that, at least for Vermont kids, that could continue.
Yeah, talking about that, we had a report recently. Our meals are up by about 30%, our school meals, and the projected cost from the agency was 29 million last year, which we knew was not accurate, but didn't argue it. But the cost of it is down to around $24 million, with a 30% increase in the number of meals being served. And you folks changed the makeup of reimbursement in DC, which helped that certainly. But we didn't have one negative comment on the universal meals program from any of the schools that we had in. Our school administrators, the hot lunch people, they said that it's changed the attitude of children in our schools. They hang out more often in the hot lunch area than they used to. No, it's been great. And of course, the 2 years that you folks helped provide free meals certainly gave us a big push on continuing it. And those numbers during that time helped sell the program here in Vermont. And it's just been really good. The only thing we need to straighten out is the milk issue. So we still got that left. And I don't know if you had a milk container sitting in the hot lunch area where children could go and either take their skim or take, say, 2% even. I think the little test program would the skim milk would sour before it got used up, and the 2% of whole milk would be gone. But anyway, are there questions from the committee? We do have E.B. Fleury on from the agency. Evie, do you have anything you wanted to add or questions in regards to the milk issue?
No, this is something that it seems to come up every year, and more and more I feel like as was spoken before, whether by Christian or Alex, is just there's a difference between highly processed fats and whole fats that are naturally found in our foods and how our bodies process those down. And so more and more what we've seen, whether it's from nutritionists at UVM that have been researching like full fat yogurts and how they actually help people that are diabetic, help with balancing things, or just in whole milk, um, whole milk being a more desirable tasting product, and in building habits with our youth that, you know, they're consuming milk and it tastes good will bring more nutrition into their life from a well-balanced food, and continue their milk consumption to later on in life. And so this is something that I feel at our agency we have a lot of feedback from producers, from our dairy farmers and processors to parents of kids, that they want the food that's in their community served to their children in the schools, and trying to find a way to balance the funding that comes from USDA and others, that goes to our education departments and helps pay for the food, and meeting the required balanced diet with trying to explore how do we address what we're learning more and more of nutritious foods and in the balance of the processed. And so I'm hoping with the efforts on a federal level that is happening with our congregation, that I'm appreciative of trying to address what I've personally summarized in my simpleton way, in that it's not the milk that's making us fat, it's what we eat with the milk that makes us fat. And so I hope that the whole milk effort can be provided and children given an option to pick what they want when they're consuming it. And I don't know, maybe one glorious day, other than chocolate milk, maybe we could have maple milk as an option, because I think that is far superior and would also help our maple producers. But we support whatever efforts there is and feedback we have in our communities to try to have whole milk as an option for students to pick from in their schools.
Thank you, Evie. Yeah, the other thing that I want to bring up, and I think I'm accurate, is, of course, we produce most of the milk in New England up here in Vermont. And as far as I know, most schools use half pint cartons that for their hot lunch program. And I think I'm accurate in saying that we don't have a packaging plant in Vermont that does half pints. So what happens is our milk gets loaded on a tanker trucked to Massachusetts, packaged in half pint containers, and then trucked back up to Vermont to be distributed. And if that is accurate, the way everybody's talking about global warming and fossil fuels and all that, we're sending a tanker load of milk to Boston, unloading, sending that truck back empty, and then sending a truck behind it back with a load of half pint milks to be distributed. And then that truck, being a box truck trailer, goes back empty. So we're making a complete round trip with a tractor trailer unit with nothing in it, because one's coming home empty and the other one's going back to Mass empty. And Evie, could you tell us if we have any manufacturer in Vermont that packages half pint milk?
We do not, Senator Starr, and I apologize. I didn't introduce myself formally, on the record. I'm E.B. Flory. I'm the Food Safety and Consumer Protection Division Director at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. So my apologies on that. But we do not have a processor in the state that's manufacturing with that. The equipment to, to use that type of packaging is expensive. And so we don't have anyone in our state doing that, but we do have, through funding that we've gotten through the legislature for our institutions. There are some schools, which this is on a school by school basis, that have applied for the milk cooler programs, where they can have dispensers where the milk is in a bigger bag. And you were speaking of this earlier, Senator Starr, where we have seen and been able to have some local farmstead processors and others get their milk into local schools. And so that has been a success, but that is at a somewhat of a smaller scale when you look at all of the school possibilities. And as you're speaking of the shipping and trucking issues with the cartons. So
Yeah, so we do have the dispensers. So there's a little bit that doesn't have to go take a ride to Mass and then back.
Yeah.
But that would give you another little item to argue the point where it would be good if we could have a choice of what we wanted to offer. And I bet there's some other states that are in the same situation, except for they probably don't have to ship it both ways. Like Rhode Island or some of the smaller states. Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just wondering, EB, whether there are downsides to, and I don't want to say requiring, but encouraging schools to use the dispenser type way to get the milk to the kids. What could possibly somebody say, well, that's not a good idea? In other words, do away with the half pints and just strictly use the dispensing machine.
I think, I think honestly, Senator, it comes down to logistics wise, what works for the school, the layout of the school, the layout of their kitchen space, and how they want to handle the cleaning of that area. You're dealing with cups then, compared to the cartons. And so I think a lot of it comes down to just the organization of the school and how they want to handle the food service. We've had schools that have switched from cartons to the dispensers and they absolutely love it. And there's other schools that, for different reasons, haven't been as interested. So I think some of it just comes down to the makeup and the layout of the kitchen space and the staffing. And I think also, potentially the different age demographics at different schools, as well. So,
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Ryan, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, and along the same line, Senator, like a lot of this comes down to compliance and reimbursement. So to my knowledge, there's no law that is preventing us from putting whole milk in schools. It will just not be reimbursed through the school meal program. So it makes it non-functional. And so that's also true in some of the challenges around the dispensing of milk or like just feeding kids in general is counting how much milk is going out the door. So you can then get reimbursed for that milk. And a larger dispenser can add some challenges to that if it's like self-serve and someone's not watching it and counting it to make sure they get reimbursed. And that's where all of this, I mean, I think some schools are using like Miller Farm in milk down in Brattleboro in their school, but I think they're either getting some secondary funding for that or eating the cost because it's important to them. And that circles us all the way back around to the farm to school work, where it's like we are trying to allow schools to use food that's nutritious, locally grown, and made. And a lot of that is just getting them the ability to purchase it and get reimbursed through USDA in a way that makes some sense. And you know, it's red tape. And so, you know, we're trying to localize some of those decisions as best we can while also maintaining standards to make sure kids are eating well. And we make progress a little bit. I mean, it happened during the pandemic. We demonstrated, to your point, really great results around universal meals. The same is true for universal meals. Like schools can do it. Nothing's stopping them other than the money. And so, you know, we're trying to make sure folks get reimbursed because we feel like that's a valuable thing. You all did the same thing in your investment in the program. And so yeah, we've demonstrated some success during the pandemic in those programs.
So Ryan, yeah, how does the law read on that? You can, if you keep track, you can get reimbursed, or how does that work? What's the law say?
You know, this school nutrition association's probably the right people to ask because they are subject matter experts. But, you know, there's a relatively precise, and we hear this from schools, there are very precise volumes and amounts of food that qualify as servings. And so they serve that half pint carton because that is probably the least amount of milk that qualifies as a serving. And is that packaging exists almost exclusively because it is defined in the school meal program through USDA. And if it weren't defined that way, the packaging would look very different. So if it was defined as something the size of a Miller Farm bottle of milk, like that's what you would see in schools. And so that's sort of a policy choice, and it is very specific. And, you know, the question is whether that specificity is important to like fidelity in the program, or if, you know, as we've proven in some of these like feeding programs during the pandemic, not just in schools, but outside of schools, whether some flexibility is possible to allow people to make some of these decisions on their own without the sky falling and sort of the like waste, fraud, and abuse boogeyman entering the room. And we did that in Vermont. And so like, you know, we're keeping at it.
So if we had a cooler, so when you trip the handle, it would dispense a half a pint. And
It would make things easier. Yeah.
And had a cup there that held a half a pint. You could be reimbursed if you counted your cups. And you used 100, say at hot lunchtime. You'd have to count the cups instead of the little carton. So there might be a way that we can, count our servings. But it would have to, the fat content would have to be increased. So if they were running close to their nutritional level on their meal, it would have to compensate for the half pint of, say, whole milk versus a half a pint of 2%.
Yeah. That's part of the juggling act that the school nutritionists and others are working within the, as Ryan mentioned and Katie has, like some of this gets back to how the schools get reimbursed to afford the food to feed the children, and so you've got to handle the red tape aspect.
Yeah. Well, I didn't realize that they would reimburse for whole milk. I thought it was a rule that you couldn't serve whole milk. So you learn you learn something every day, even at my age.
And I think the key to the reimbursement piece is again, like the per meal, including all components of what they're served, isn't meeting the requirements. And so that's how it gets reimbursed. And so if you exceed that with whole milk, then they're not going to pursue whole milk and they're going to want the skim because they're counting it's a very tight amount of calories and whatnot per meal. So it's a tough juggling act.
Other questions for the delegation members?
No, it's great. Very
Uh,
helpful.
what we may do is send you folks a letter encouraging you to support, our program and support, the 2% or whole milk situation. Then, just for official record, you'd have that on file. Are there
It's a good-
any other questions that you have for us or issues that we should stay awake on? No? Well,
No.
thanks a lot for coming on this morning and being with us and I figured you guys were okay as far as voting the right way on this. I was just wondering where it was or is in the process. So there are no other questions. Thanks again, and we'll keep an eye out for things.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Great to see you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Evie.
Bye-bye, Evie.
So, I wonder how that is working.
I didn't know that either. I thought it was
I-
not allowed.
Yeah.
No, you just don't get money for it.
Well,
That's a
Remember
different.
that whole push back and forth when we were kids about margarine, everybody. believed
Oh, yeah.
margarine,
Yeah,
and-
the
Remember
difference,
that?
like transmission.
then coffee was good, then it wasn't, then it
Right.
was, then it wasn't.
Well, I'd
Apple light
recommend
margarine.
coffee.
Everybody-
I'd recommend not going upstairs and getting any. They put dark coffee grounds in the white coffee dispenser. Now, I'm gonna have curly hair. It's awful stuff. I told the lady, I said, I don't know, it seems to be awful dark for some reason. And I'll check that.
That's all right.
So I went back 2 minutes later and she did. Oh, she said somebody put dark coffee grounds in making the white coffee.
I complained about this with, why aren't you able in the cafeteria to get something other than with milk?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I sit there, I've got cholesterol issues and I like. And I've gone up a bunch of times, gone up because Jane will have cookies in the committee and I want milk with my goodness. And, but if I,
do the whole milk.
it's a little much with my cholesterol.
Well, Michael, I was thinking of doing, I was thinking we would do a resolution, but I think if we're just gonna do something to our two senators, we'll just do a letter. And, Michael O'Grady, has that,
Okay,
so he may be doing the letter, but you could check with him.
okay, and I'll tell him that you're not doing the res, that you just want to proceed with the letter.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Okay.
Maybe we should send a letter to represent, or Congresswoman Ballot to thank her.
Yes.
yeah,
That's a nice one too.
yeah.
I will mention that.
I hope she.
Thank you.
For it. Well, it was unanimous. right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was unanimous, so, yeah,
Okay, then I will be off.
yeah,
Well,
well,
have a good day.
thanks for.
I hadn't realized that your committee had moved into this room.
This, last year.
Yeah, if they want to come earlier. Yeah, we've got cleanup from yesterday coming up, but we could do that
Yeah.
now and
That'd be great.
then,
See if they're available.
the sponsors of our Southern Home. Six building. And next week, I've got, we've got some organic guys coming,
Oh, good.
on Southern Home. So we got, conventional people coming. We got I got Michael working on some language that might help that bill. And so we'll see what the testimony, brings and.
Good.
And, but I don't know if they had farmers in upstairs or not. I'd like to get some of the seed people in that actually, once we probably should add them first, but, we had the guy from up your way, Lanphier Boyd, and I know he told us, that he thought or felt he might need a third more cropland to grow the same yield. But you might have it in your notes, Irene.
Yeah, I'm
we'll-
basing it on whether it's anecdotal, I don't
Yeah.
know, because Quebec hasn't had this rose, so.
Yeah, we're gonna get Heather Darby in.
Good.
She's pretty straight up and knowledgeable, and try to get some Canadian authority in to talk about what has transpired up there and how their yields are the same, if not maybe even better than they were.
I'd be interested to see what the equivalent of our ag department in Quebec. I understand they go out and do extensive testing on the land, whether or not what's in the soils, and so because it dictates whether or not they would use untreated seeds or they choose the alternative. And somewhat in my worry of this is their ag department is huge and they've got ability to do those testings. As we move along and we move quicker, what should our ag agency be doing? If-
But they aren't.
Or what they aren't doing, somewhat, if you've got an agency that has the ability to do all of that stuff, I don't want to compare us to someplace where we can't match the testing, match what they've done.
Yeah, I think. I think we need to build our own. Not case, but our own desires and knowledge base to be able to. Decide properly in the best interest of, the agricultural industry as well as our resources, with these, I kind of forgot how long Quebec has been in, the no use of neon.
I think.
Yeah, 19.
But, I'd like to hear how their bee population has stayed the same, has increased, it's gotten worse, and it would be good. It would be good for us to, if we push the date out so that even the Quebec people would have an extra 4 years or 5 before ours kicks in, we could get some results from them on how their crops were still doing, were the bees coming back, were other pollinators, are they getting to see more? Um, because we're gonna need that to convince our farmers whether or not they should move in that direction, or not, and if they, if they've gotta readjust, which, farmers are very good about changing, I mean,
They have to be, right?
yeah, I
Their
mean,
life.
it's constant,
Just look at today, right? I mean.
well, this is poor man's.
Poor man's
fertilizer.
fertilizer, right?
And, so we,
Whatever grass is sneaking up looks.
that damn bill, I mean, there was, it passed big time on the House side and, they're crowding pretty hard, not letting it die in 1 second or take a rest. So next week, we're gonna spend quite a lot of time on that, the parts or chicken piece bill. I don't like that, calling that parts. It sounds like a piece of equipment that
I know.
you're taking the gear out of here and putting it over there. Yeah.
It's poultry slaughter according to this, but
Well,
we're just using our own shorthand, but
Yeah, but
call
you
it
can-
slaughter,
you
that
can-
sounds awesome.
You can slaughter it and still be a whole bird.
Yeah,
This is really,
we
It's
gotta
not
have a
farting.
different name for that than chicken parts.
Farting is such sweet slaughter.
And are we done with right to repair?
I
Are we done with right to repair?
know. We got some amendments coming. I got some coming that, so we can talk about it and
Right.
figure out what we're gonna do with that, so.
It's funny, I still haven't heard from one.
We could change the name of the poultry bill,
Yeah.
you know how they make it at the last, and upon passage, this will be referred to.
Yeah, we should.
I don't know what you wanna call it.
Well, if you go to the store and you buy breasts,
Yeah.
you don't call it a chicken part.
Right, no, go pick up some chicken parts at the market, yeah.
What would you call
I don't know.
Boneless thighs, I mean, I think you refer to whatever the part is that you want, right? So.
Yeah, but you can't put that in the title.
it? No, we should have a generic,
Yeah.
term that,
Well, chicken parts or, well, it's not, so it's poultry parts.
it should be at least, you got an idea?
No, I'm just going to tell you, the representative's coming in now for the next.
Oh, good.
Oh, good.
Good.
Set on
Jesus.
And if anybody wants them before, I forget, those glasses up there, those are all glasses for the solar eclipse.
Oh, yeah,
There are
I
a bunch of
picked
them.
That's really nice of you to bring them out.
Are they
My wife
nasty?
spent about $30.
Did she? There are a bunch, WCAX left them and brought down the
Are they
Senate.
NASA approved?
I don't know, WCAX, yeah, so take some,
Oh,
yeah.
I know, I'll grab
Yeah,
one.
grab
I
one.
think,
Yeah, but I
It says
wanna make
WC
sure that somebody gets that, those are the good ones.
I know.
Right.
who,
WCAX says, it says it right on this.
who do they have to be approved by?
Well, NASA,
Yeah.
ISO.
Oh, okay.
Right?
There's a little seal on
There
it.
is.
Oh, would you grab a pair of, well, Richie, the cigarette.
Let's stop
Yeah,
this
it's
right
one
here.
of the pack of 20.
do you need 8706 and 80? That's who's coming next.
Yeah.
Yes,
I got
there's
it.
a- I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my
there are a bunch
God.
of-
There's
We can
supposed
make
to
some
be-
money.
There's supposed to be a little seal on it.
You want
It
this?
says,
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Well, anyway,
Want to see
there's,
the seal?
yeah, the IS.
There's that good housekeeping seal. Oh, there is. There's the ISO seal. That's what you need.
And,
There is.
well, she couldn't find
It
the
says
ISO seal,
Lisa
so
was the,
she kept looking and found some that has the
Where did-
ISO seal on it and
And they
bought a
charge them.
bunch more.
God, these are dark. Where's she buying it? You know?
Amazon.
On Amazon, that's right, that's
And
of
they were made in China, of course.
course.
And you may
This
want
is
to
great.
wear those when our next witness comes in.
Oh, that won't be able to see.
Well, that means we'll listen harder, right? When kids, we
Yeah.
listen harder.
Cause you guys are gonna see it really well up there.
Yeah. Oh,
You're gonna hide your dad.
Yeah,
Right.
unless it's a
I
day.
can't see
Yeah,
nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah, you look good, bro.
yeah, perfect, Colin Moore. Thank you.
What an improvement.
That's it.
Yeah, no, these are.
Yeah, take
These are legit.
Are you
Yeah.
gonna leave from, Troy on Sunday or Monday next week? I'm trying to figure out where the least amount of traffic might be
Oh,
when.
geez, good
Oh,
question.
Well,
luck with
we're
that.
right on the
See, they'll let you zoom
Canadian
in on
border,
Tuesday
so
morning.
they should be,
But I mean, to come back here
oh, I don't come down to.
until Tuesday.
Early,
I come down.
Early
Monday,
Thursday.
Monday.
Tuesday morning.
I come up Monday.
I do too.
It's
I'm
gonna be really,
bumper to bumper.
But
It is.
it'll be bad Monday,
well,
Monday
I may have to
night.
stay over till Tuesday.
People moving around to eat and go to their motel. and-
Yes.
No,
Good for
that'll,
tourism,
Maybe Tuesday morning.
good for the economy.
No, I get that, that's fine. I just don't wanna be bumper to bumper on
I don't
89.
either, I don't either, I'm expecting it.
I told you
Just-
about
just
coming
nasty.
back from Maine when we had the concert up in Orleans County on the front.
No,
Well,
The
we
fish
were,
concert,
pardon?
the fish concert, which concert?
Yeah, I think it was a fish concert.
Like
It's
20
up
years
in
ago?
Derby County or.
Or?
Well, we were coming up through from Old Orchard or, not Old Orchard, go down the road, where it's more civilized. But we were on our, grab a chair. We were coming up through and
We're talking about
about the
the
traffic.
fish concert.
Perfect.
Oh.
So
What do you
I,
think?
I was thinking of getting off in St. Jay and coming up on Route 5, get home and. After, no traffic, we'll sail right up through there. We'll get up above Lindenville
Yep.
where there's no
choice, yeah.
and the entire road was plugged, they were stopped, people were eating beside the road, I mean.
You weren't going anywhere.
And you couldn't,
Oh, that's right.
couldn't get to a turnaround, and that was bad. But anyways, we're talking about Monday traffic and
We
how
can
it
talk about
was
fish
years
concerts.
ago. So, we've got, we received your 706 bill.
Mhm.
And, next week, we intend to work on that, so, not a lot, but some.
Mhm.
And, thought we would have you in to run through it, you know, we may have some questions, but the big issue is to get us up to speed to understand it a little better.
Mhm.
And, the other day, it got crazy in here and so thanks for coming that day, but, sorry that we couldn't work it in.
That's
Uh,
what committees do, right? That they expand and contract.
No, and
Yeah.
it's really, gets to you some days. But anyway, welcome and, I think, do you know everybody?
Yeah.
And,
Thank you.
so we're good, to go in regards to your, you know, your thoughts behind it and putting it together and, getting it over to us, so.
Okay, well, thank you for taking it up and, approaching it and, actually brought a document I'd like to give to each of you. I sent it to Linda
And it's
earlier.
also on your webpage. Well,
There we go.
Whoops.
You know, we wouldn't wanna have any fossil fuels burning around the state hill. You know, it could get to us, and come on, batteries, kick in.
Again, did it say the internet's off or?
No, you're on, we're still on,
Still
so we
on.
can meet, with me as
So,
long as I can.
we're still quite bright in this room because, we got good window space, so. Well, anyway, let's, get with it. I guess we can still see your paper.
I can see if all of you can. So my goal in this bill, the genesis of it was, for years I've been reading about the possible threats of neonicotinoids or impacts. I want to back up, and I think I mentioned this informally at one point, that in another lifetime, I was managed an orchard just over the border in New York, and I was
I noticed apple trees got left ill.
so I was we'll get to that. So I was a licensed spray applicator in New York. I'm also a backyard beekeeper, so I have or have had fingers in a couple of different pies. But when I read about what New York was doing, it seemed to me like a balanced approach. And I thought, I like that. And my goal is a bill that is really science driven, evidence driven, and not an ideological position. Because the goal of the bill, give farmers the tools they need, may be different than the tools they use. But farmers the tools they need, create a healthier environment, and incidentally increase the supply choices for farmers so that they can buy untreated seed if they want to, which is currently, it's not, you can't do it now.
No.
And in the bill, the findings lay out a lot of information. I watched your, when Mike O'Grady walked through it on Friday.
Yeah.
And there was some question about where's the information from. And so the finding that I would like to focus in on is number 6, which is the Cornell University report. And that's what I've handed out here, the executive summary. Thank you for not providing the full report.
It'd be on page 6 or?
No, it's finding number 6 in the bill.
Oh,
References the Cornell lab.
That's a big part of the bill.
Yeah.
1, 2, I thought.
yeah, you got a lot of findings in.
Yeah. And so I provided the executive summary of that report, which is kind of the gold standard in research. That's the one I just handed out.
Yeah.
And that's like a meta study of 11,000 other peer-reviewed reports. The full report's 500 pages, so I didn't give you that.
Thank you.
Well, we could get that and read a page a day and.
And we'll come back in 2 years and then we can talk about it.
Yeah.
But there's nobody left,
Right.
that's a little too.
600 pages, so
It's 500 or so, but
somebody did a lot of work.
did a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the finding that I want to go back to kind of underpin this bill. And so if you refer to the executive summary that I just handed out now, and I've highlighted sections of it. In the second paragraph, I just highlighted the first sentence because that came up on Friday. How long have units been around? They've been around since the 1990s and
30.
have quickly become the dominant pesticide.
Yeah.
So they are used far more of their pesticides because they're very effective. And as the predominant pesticide, that is the one that the most concern in research is conducted on. In the third paragraph, it really outlines the three areas that the Cornell report focused on. Which is estimating or trying to determine the benefits of pest control and plant protection as currently used. Estimate the risk to pollinators as currently used, and evaluate the relative benefits and risks of substitutes for neonics in case
So there are substitutes.
there are, and some of them are chemical. There diamides were mentioned.
Yeah, yeah.
It depends on the pest.
Yeah.
And this gets to why some orchard use or berry use is exempted. And we'll get to that.
Not because you were
Not because I was
a licensed applicant.
right. Not quite that.
That's good to clear that.
Yeah, yeah. So those are the three things it focuses on. It does not look at things like impacts on human health or how long residue lasts in soil or water, or how readily it transmits to water soluble. Neonics are water soluble and they do travel into the water and maintain their toxicity in water because the toxicity is so great. I attended the annual Vermont Beekeepers Association meeting, which was largely about neonics. And I hope you'll have them in the talk. They have great scientific studies, and they're talking about death within 5 minutes at exposure of 5 parts per billion. So we're talking about minute exposures causing instant death, or relatively instant death, let alone the exposures at lower levels that cause physiological or reproductive damage.
How long did you say?
5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Right.
At 5 to 7 parts per billion.
See, we did do, we have done a little work and I think it figured out in Vermont, we use 5 tons of neonics a year to grow our 90 to 100,000 acres.
Right.
You know, but that takes, it's just 5 minutes for a spat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you heard from Mike O'Grady that uptake into the plant in treated seed corn, uptake into the plant is about 3% of the effective pesticide. And the rest goes into soil and water largely. And so that residue is in the soil and in the water, and native pollinators, many of them are ground nesting.
Oh,
So there's, honeybees are in their hives and they're closely managed, but native pollinators are, I don't remember the exact percentage, but
About 90% of Vermont's native bees
and
are
they're,
nest
ground
in the soil.
nesters.
Yeah.
and they're grounded, I mean,
So they're nesting in the soil. About 90% of the 350 plus species of native bees we have in Vermont are nesting in the soil,
soil.
where about 95% of the neonics from those treated seeds are.
Is in the
Yes.
soil.
Right.
Well, that's said, I mean, you learn, you guys have dug pretty deep. And so you have more facts than we've certainly heard.
Yeah, we spent, we took hours and hours of testimony. We had Scott McCart, who did the Cornell report that Robin's talking about, came in and testified. And that report was actually essentially produced at the directive of New York, who was just starting to look at, okay, what would it look like if we did this?
Right.
How can we get somebody to gather all the information we need to be looking at in one place?
And the thing that I really appreciated about his testimony was that it was about the science. And he was saying that, if people want to attack meat, that's fine. science is the science. It's not, doesn't have a spin to it. But maybe you'll have him in, he testified remotely from Australia, I believe, for the House.
From Australia?
Yeah. If so, yeah, I was saying that there are many other aspects of use, like persistence in soil and water, human health, bird health. You know, if a bird takes a kernel of treated corn, that's, I believe, I haven't heard the testimony on this, but I've seen headlines that say,
I used to
eat a
be,
kernel of corn and they die.
when, years back when I was growing up, helping my dad with the corn planting, little garden. I'd stir the tar oil and stuff. The damn crows would follow right along behind the planter. And pick the corn right out of the ground. And you don't see that today like you used to. You know that,
I used to ride on the seed drill,
oh,
pulling up to free them when they got snagged on rocks or grass or something. And when I had time, throwing stones at the crows.
yeah, they all right along.
Yeah. So if we go to, and I'm gonna skip through this
Yeah,
executive summary quickly. So if you go to page 3, highlighted at the top is sort of the addressing the science again, that their report drew on over 5,000 field trials, analyzing the performance of the pesticides. And the results of that are the two sections, the two first sentences that I highlighted below that. And here we get into apples. So for many fruit and vegetable crops, neonicotinoid products provide consistent benefits. And there are not necessarily alternatives that do that task. So,
wish they'd pay their white bill.
yeah. You know, orchardists that testified, or actually one that I spoke with, I don't know if he testified later, was saying, you know, they might do a foliar application in July to address a specific pest, and they'll do it at night, low wind conditions. And it is.
Over that years ago here in the legislature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bottom paragraph, I've highlighted that first sentence. In contrast to neonicotinoid applications in fruit and vegetable crops, routine use of neonic treated seeds does not consistently increase net income for corn or soybean producers. So different uses, different impacts, different availability of alternatives.
And that was from the study.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's why there are two portions to the bill, one about treated article seed and one about other uses.
So that, not the question yet, but even if they spray apple orchards at night, that never gets to the soil.
It's out in the environment. It's, you know, it's not a,
You know, most stuff falls down.
yeah, yeah,
Sure.
yeah, it's released into the environment. It's not a good situation, for sure.
They haven't developed another
Right.
spray to take its place.
Yeah, and I'm sure it, you know, it lands on whatever the ground cover is, which includes flowers and grasses and.
Yeah.
Uh,
Just one note there is that these pesticides are much more persistent in the soil than they are when they're exposed to sunlight. So if they're sprayed and they're exposed to sunlight, they dissipate much more quickly, as opposed to being, you know, when a seed is planted inches down into the soil, they can persist for a lot longer. And so
right.
as the and then they don't lose efficacy as they spread in the soil or in the water.
Right, they degrade in sunlight.
Exactly.
But,
Plus it's a liquid rather than a little.
mhm, yeah. And so I wanted to also use that distinction to reframe what in house became much of the question. And the conflict became dairy farmers who need neonics versus bee farmers who are threatened by use of neonics. And I really want to reframe the debate about, I mean, on the floor, there were at least two people who said farmers need neonics. And I want to posit that farmers need healthy and abundant crops. They need healthy animals. They need a robust and sustainable environment. They need affordable costs. Neonics may or may not be a tool to achieve that. And so the purpose of this Cornell report is, do farmers need neonics to achieve those ends of healthy crops, a financially viable farm, healthy animals, and a healthy environment? And that's really the framework that I've been trying to keep in mind, and I ask you to keep in mind when looking at this question. If we go to page 4, this is a quick look at the impact of neonics, a recent worldwide meta-analysis of pesticide residue found in these are honeybee hives. Found that 5 pesticides are high risk. 3 of those 5 pesticides are neonics. So again, it's the prevalence, the abundant use that is causing the risk. Bottom sentence on that page talks about exposures in field crops occurring months and even years after neonics were used, indicating widespread contamination. And that's the part Mike was referencing about what's the word? Deactivating in soil, deactivating sunlight, but not necessarily in soil and water, where the residue remains toxic for months or even years.
How far back did they test soil? Did you get that?
I think that
It's been used since the 80s.
90s, since the 90s.
Oh, I thought I saw 80s, since 90s.
Yeah.
But still, that's 25,
That's on the
25 to 30.
yeah page 1, second paragraph.
Early 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got 10. 30. So they go back like 20 years and see if it was still in the soil or.
I don't know the answer to that.
I believe we heard testimony that it's likely something more like 18 months that it
Oh.
persists in the soil. So it's not sort
It's
of
not
that decade,
forever.
but in terms of impact to, you know, a soil nesting pollinator, it's long
Why
enough to be, yeah.
Why I ask that is if if we tracked behind what other areas are doing in this, if we track far enough behind that, we would get a pretty good picture of how things are working in those areas that came before us. And
Yeah, which is why the testimony from Quebec was particularly helpful because it's been 5 years, in place there.
yeah, that. Yeah. And
Yeah,
Linda, do you have the New York? Who to get hold of in New York?
To go back, yes,
So we're gonna hear from.
Yeah, we heard from an agronomist who is with the Ministry of Agriculture there. I'm not sure if that's the.
Who's Robert?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
and interestingly, in Quebec, the report that I read was a mix of no-till and traditional planting. So I know there's been some discussion of different kinds of planting, no-till versus traditional, irregular.
And I'm sorry, tell me why that piece is important.
Because as the discussion gets deeper,
Yeah.
I know there's been a question about no-till. There are the standard planting, you have essentially a barren surface.
Yeah.
No-till, you have a bio,
Mixture of grasses and.
missing the word here.
You've created organic
Biome.
material that
Right.
is perhaps more a more friendly host to pests. It's essentially the argument that's being made.
That's what I said.
I think one thing that we heard is that a lot of these studies that are included in this analysis by Cornell came from Pennsylvania, where with sort of a national leader in no-till agriculture. So, and they're still not finding that there's any difference between the efficacy.
Got it, thanks, yeah.
So, yeah, thank you for coming back to share why that's
Glad
important.
you brought this guy with you.
And looking at that study about the in-hive residues, I guess I want to raise the question that Senator Collins asked about the Agency of Ag report on honeybee health versus pollinator health. And when you have beekeepers in, the Vermont Beekeepers Association or anybody, they will tell you passionately about the impacts on their hives with die-out rates between 35 and 80%. One of the reasons that there are a lot of hives are that they are frantically dividing their hives and requeening to try to keep populations up. And so there may be a lot of hives, but they're not necessarily healthy hives. And the die-offs that they've seen, traditionally there's a large winter kill with beehives. They're seeing die-offs start in July and August now. And it's not fully attributable to varroa mites. It's not fully attributable to pesticides. And it's not fully attributable to other environmental stressors, but I think it's all three of those. And so they are seeing the early die-offs, more severe die-offs, and are trying to keep hive numbers up by dividing, by managing as best they can. But I also question the managed honeybees are a sector. They're an economic sector, but in terms of pollinators, they are a non-native, highly managed species. And so if you are trying to determine pollinator health by looking at this one highly managed species, to me, that's like trying to determine avian health by counting laying hens. It's a highly managed economic subsector of birds, and honeybees are the same when we're talking about pollinators. And so question the value of that analysis at all. As well as the conclusions they reach. Just wanted to throw that in the mix to confuse issues more. If we go to the next highlighted section, with bold, it says relative risks, benefits and risks of neonates compared to likely substitutes in New York. And what I highlighted there is reiteration of notably neonicotinoid treated corn and soybean seeds do not consistently increase expected net income compared to untreated seeds or pyrethroid insecticide alternatives. And again, this is, there are 5,000 field studies and 1,100 peer-reviewed reports. And that's the big takeaway. On the next page, and again, that's corn and soybeans as opposed to other crops. The next page, it highlighted one sentence. If treated repeatedly with a single class of insecticide, pest populations can develop resistance or rapidly. And that's been broadly true of hope. I'm sorry, that's on the next last page. And that's true with pests as it is with germs and antibiotics. And if they develop resistance when you become over reliant on a single product.
Where did that particular statement, where did that come from? From what study?
So this is again contained within the Cornell Life Sciences report, Cornell University.
Because I would expect to get some pushback from that, from farmers, on that, they.
And I would think that botanists and, well, again, science, the medical world will tell
Professor
you
would
that
say that that's your statement.
overexposure to
Because if you can't, I mean, what we've heard in the past is, well, even if I wanted to buy untreated seeds, they wouldn't be available for me because the seeds that farmers are getting now were made last summer or last fall
right.
by the manufacturers, and so maybe that's why it's pushed out too. So
That's why
there will be other product. I just hope we don't get a product that's worse than neonics coming in to take its place.
It's an evolution, going from DDT
Yeah,
to
how we got this.
to LR. And I mean, years ago, orchardists used arsenic routinely.
Yeah.
And thank goodness we don't do that anymore. So we're learning, we're growing, we're developing. The industry is developing more and more targeted products.
Yeah.
And we have to determine what the payoff, the trade-off is.
Ask the catcher. Did farmers talk at all about any financial component to buying untreated seeds? Are they more expensive? Is anything there that we should be thinking about?
I think Mike can address that better than I can.
Yeah, so I mean, farmers, again, as you've heard, don't have an option right now. I think what we heard is that it would be hard to justify an untreated seed, a seed that's not treated with a pesticide being more expensive than a seed that is treated with a pesticide for obvious
So
reasons,
no,
right?
no financial difference.
Not that we, yeah.
Okay,
Thanks. I think that, you know, realistically, this bill will require the seed companies to develop new delivery routes. There's a cost there. But once those are established, I would expect that an untreated article might be less. We heard, should we sit up here together?
I guess we could let him know, then. Just better mend your ways, so. No, welcome.
I remember, I don't remember where it was, but hearing informally about untreated seed being up to $20 cheaper per bag.
It should be.
Exactly, it should be, right?
Yeah.
If they're not treating it with a product, then there shouldn't be any reason why it's more expensive than it certainly should. Logically tell you it should be.
But I didn't hear that as testimony, I heard it as discussion, so I want to make that distinction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, before neonics were coated on seeds, were people buying untreated seeds?
Yeah.
I mean, is there a familiarity with the seed that isn't treated, even if it's
Oh, sure.
before the nineties or something? Okay.
Years ago, you'd put fertilizer in a hopper, and that would, go in front of the
Untreated seed,
seed.
okay.
And, yeah, it was loose and in bags usually. Now the seed come in big hopper and they feed them in with an auger. And so the operator really isn't subjected to any of the dust or if there is any.
Thank you.
And just to be clear, seeds are treated with things other than neonics now, right? Seeds are treated with fungicides to prevent rot, seeds. So there are sort of other chemistries that are going onto these seeds.
That would still happen.
Yeah,
Would be
exactly.
allowable, yes.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing that I had highlighted was just the final paragraph, the last page. Which is exactly what we were talking about, the evolution, of better, more effective tools with fewer side effects, more targeted. And that is ongoing, will be, and that's also part of the 5-year lead-in time that we talked about.
And I would just add, on the conversation of sort of, are we creating a monster? Are we gonna ban one product and lead to the use of something else that's more dangerous? We heard sort of that we asked that question of all of the biologists and other scientists who came before our committee. And to a T, they said, listen, diamides, for instance, the sort of the most logical, readily available alternative in a lot of cases currently. They're not perfect. They certainly have negative impacts on certain, we heard that they have negative impacts on aquatic species, insect species. But to a T, they all said going from neonic, for instance, treated corn seeds to diamide treated corn seeds, if every farmer were to do that, it would be a net gain. It would be better. It would be a significant improvement for pollinator populations.
Yeah. And, so
That was what I had prepared.
Yeah.
If you want to refer back to, I could discuss the original bill, since you did the walkthrough with Mike already.
Are you on the committee, Rob?
No,
No,
okay, just to introduce the bill. So I didn't necessarily want to drag you all through that again,
yeah,
but I'm happy to answer questions.
it's, I mean, we've got to learn as much as we can about this, before we move forward.
Mhm.
And, we're 2/3, pushing 3/4 of the way through the session. And so, we've got to pick up the pace
Mhm.
to be able to get this we're gonna get this done. You guys hard the time. Plain English. No, Michael was good.
Yeah.
And, he can present things so you understand it.
Right.
Pretty well.
Yeah, and I think you did a great job in highlighting certain portions of the Cornell report. But just to be fair, there are other sentences which, because I tried to read through the whole thing at one point. So on the second to last page, it says a shift away from neonics will likely place greater burden on farmers and pesticide applicators. As noted above, there are few or no effective chemical alternatives to neonics. And even when effective substitutes are available, the loss of neonics from insecticide rotations would be problematic for some New York crops. And then on the last page, and you've mentioned this before, Robin, and I'm only gently pushing back.
Yeah.
So maybe 3/4 of the way up the page, the sentence starts with furthermore. It is essential to consider risk from neonics in relation to their likely substitutes. No pest management product or technique is risk-free, and several likely alternatives to neonics pose risks of their own. To this end, we make note of contexts in which IPM approaches, et cetera, et cetera. So even in the Cornell report, which leans obviously strongly in favor of more limited use of neonics, it's not 100 to nothing. I mean, there's always sort of that balance. And I have read other reports where, and I know one of them was from a German manufacturer, Bayer, I think, that makes neonics. Well, guess what they found? They found that they were okay. But there are parts of that where there was pretty good clinical evidence to suggest that, again, it's not an all or nothing approach. So I think the committee's going to definitely take a look at the bill. I'd be interested in whether, and Mike can help me out maybe, did the committee take any testimony with regard to exempting golf courses? They spray once a year, from what I understand, in the spring, and they're done with it. They don't do anything more. I know there may be bees and other pollinators kind of hanging around the golf courses, but I would be interested in at least entertaining possibly an amendment to this, which would exempt the golf courses. I've heard from Killington and the Burlington Country Club that, so I didn't know whether you took any testimony on that.
Yeah, we heard from the person who's in charge of, I can tell you his actual title. Person who manages the pesticide applications, director of agronomy at the club at Spruce Peak in Stowe.
Okay.
So two golf courses there that he manages. And he expressed concerns with the ban and also told us that there are alternatives that they would turn to manage the specific pests that they're using neonics for currently. So I think the committee felt that both because there are alternative chemistries that could treat those pests, and we did sort of specifically an addition that we made to the language in committee was specifically to name that turf applicators were eligible to apply for and receive those exemptions just like farmers are. That was sort of a point that came up, well, if we don't name them specifically, are they? So we did add that language to make sure that golf courses could apply for those exemptions with the agency.
I also noticed though that the exemption part that you put in much different than what New York put in. A lot more hoops to jump through and so I'm wondering, where did that language come from?
Robin can speak probably to the generation of the language. What we did in the committee was, when the bill was introduced, had that authority with ANR, and we heard a lot of testimony from farmers that they would be much more comfortable with that, being housed at the Agency of Agriculture, and we did make that change. So swap the roles, gave that authority to the Secretary of Agriculture.
Who did have?
The bill as introduced had it with ANR, and that's because I think the language was based, was based on the New York bill, and in New York, the equivalent of ANR does all of their pesticides regulations in New York. So they came over here and we sort of took a look at it and said, oh, well, in the context of Vermont, the way pesticides are regulated in Vermont, that might not make sense. We should probably get that authority over to agriculture.
But as, I'm sorry if I can jump at that, but as introduced that, I was comfortable with that language of it being in ANR because pesticides are not, I mean, they're an agricultural tool, but they are a larger environmental determinant. And they are, so you can make an argument that about where that authority should lie. I started out making the argument and kind of quickly gave it up.
Well, the chair will likely want it back with ANR.
Yeah, you know, they've got a third of the state's employees, I think, you know, they could do a much better job, I'm sure. And if not, they could hire a couple more and we wouldn't even notice, 2 on 800, but 2 across the street in ag. We might have to rent a bigger space. So, you know, they could just fill them in some places. Yeah,
If I could, just one point to note, I think with you were saying that this is maybe a harder exemption than the one in New York. I think it's different and it does call for them to evaluate, for the agency to evaluate the various ways in which these, you know, giving an exemption would impact pollinator species, et cetera. But one way in which it's different from New York, and I think maybe in a way that is a little bit more fair to farms or others who would be seeking exemptions, is that it does allow explicitly sort of for a statewide exemption. So in the case, for instance, where we're going in and we see that 2029, the seed manufacturers aren't making these seeds available, and New York's not going to be ready, and therefore, you know, we're not going to be ready. The Secretary of Agriculture would be able to provide for a statewide exemption for everybody planting corn in the state to go and get these seeds.
well,
Whereas in New York, it is pretty specifically on a farm by farm or property by property basis. That's one way that we sort of went in a slightly more lethal direction.
probably New York does have a county somewhere that's bigger than the state of Vermont, so I
Yeah.
understand.
Or a county where they grow just as much corn as the state of Vermont.
Right.
So,
So it sounds like you had plenty of testimony from the science side of it. How much testimony do you get from growers and from people that sell these products?
Yeah, we heard from at least 9 dairy farms, sort of spread throughout the state. Conventional dairy farms. We heard also from a beef farmer, at least one orchardist.
Did you say?
Yeah, beef. Yeah. At least one orchard, apple grower. And then heard from some of the policy, heard from NOFA and from rural Vermont too. So heard from organizations representing smaller farmers as well.
Well, of course, the organic guys, they don't use, but did you get any testimony from the organic guys on their tonnage per acre and conventional guides on their tonnage per acre, so you could, I mean, this report from Cornell is pretty thorough, but our own people that for the most part, look you in the eye and tell you, I get 35 ton per acre, or 20 ton per acre, our own growers per se.
Yeah, that may have come up. We didn't hear about that in the organic context. The organic testimony was mostly in the context of sort of representing their non-corn growing farmers in wanting less sort of pesticides in the general ecosystem. Yeah, I'm sure that line of questioning came up with some of the dairy farmers, just sort of generally how much you're growing, how much per acre. We also, looked at those numbers from Agency of Ag reports that have sort of gone into detail on seeds planted per acre, tonnage resulting. I don't have those numbers on the top of my head. Yeah.
one of the farmers I spoke to in my district. Conventional farmer grows, I think about 375 acres corn each year. And his first question was, is this bill a giveaway to the organic guys? And I said, no, it's not.
Giveaway.
I mean, is it
Promoting that.
yeah, promoted by them or a gift to them to put everyone on the same playing field? I was like, no, that's not no, it's not. And it's, again, science-based with a 5-year leading period, as he said. Okay. And
But your 5 years was picked from the New York 5 years.
yes,
It wasn't based on our own ideas about being able to go back and see like what's happened in New York, because they're only gonna be a year ahead of us. So to be able to figure it out for ourselves, to check back, in 3 years to see how the soil's improved, how the tonnage is doing. It was basically based off from the New York law.
which is following that so that the delivery systems and availability of seed can be driven by New York
See,
and be available to us.
and why I bring that up is we usually follow California. And, we kind of go fly right over New York and get to the West Coast, and it kind of surprised me following New York, knowing the way New York operates. That's why I'm glad I live on the east side of the lake instead of the west side of the lake. But
The chair doesn't prefer to be first. That's what
Yeah.
I really want.
we prefer to be first, but
We follow New York rather
I'm
than
just
California,
rocking
just
you.
to keep you guessing.
I think, well, you said you worked over there before you came over here or something.
Yeah,
So I just rubbing,
Yeah.
Irene,
Thank you, Mr. Sheriff. So was the date 2029 based on science? Because I heard from people that seeds can be changed in a year or two's time. I mean, seeds are produced and then they're planted usually the next year or two, otherwise they're less viable or something, right? So what would prevent us from saying 2027 or 2026?
so the original New York bill was written for 2027. And passed by the legislature as 2027. And when the governor signed it, it was with the agreement that there would be that extension to 2029. And I don't know if you heard specific testimony on why that was, but it's changed to follow.
Yeah, I mean, the 2029 is basically, we want to be aligned with New York's timeline specifically so that the market is likely to adjust to provide these seats.
yeah, they aren't gonna make just seeds for Vermont or just for New Hampshire. When these seed companies, they make seeds for,
Right, but all of Quebec is using untreated seeds, so we buy all kinds of stuff from Canada and vice versa. Why can't we get seeds from Quebec? Why isn't there some market pressure for ag, like whoever makes seeds to
most of
send
these.
seeds to us that they can also sell to Quebec? I just don't, I'm sure it's a monopoly kind of market, right? Just about everything is nowadays. Whoever's making the seeds is making them for everybody, and they have their Quebec badge here, they've got their New York badge here. So Vermont buys some of the Quebecs. I just wanna know more about why we're pushing this out, because if we've lost even half the bees, and I've heard it was a lot more bees. Sequentially, waiting 5 years means there's no bees left in a mathematical sense, and to me, that's science-based too. So I don't wanna wait so long to institute these seeds that we have no bees left, because bees, again, from an economic standpoint, while I have orchards in my district, that would benefit from using neonics sparingly, carefully. What is their economic impact versus every other industry that relies on bees? Has there been an analysis that considers those things? Because I don't wanna be weighting certain fruit growers over everybody else who needs to have some bees left next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And are we putting off stopping treated articles with neonics so long that there will be no bees for any agricultural industry? And that's just the question I'll put out there.
I think it's a great question and one, although I'm not on the ed committee,
Yeah.
one of the days when I did attend the testimony was, there's 3 representatives from pesticide and seed companies.
Okay.
They're intertwined.
Yeah, the typically the same companies.
Yeah,
And most of the seed corn isn't grown in Quebec or in Vermont, or it's grown out in the west where they have thousands of acres and you know, that's one reason why we don't drive to Quebec to buy our seed corn. It's shipped in from out in the, I've hauled hundreds of truckloads of seed corn back from the west, our dealers here over the years here in Vermont. But did you have any of the seed companies in, like Laws or?
We had their representatives in, so that,
trade groups.
yeah, so folks from, I always love the names. The Biotechnology Innovation Organization, Responsible Industry for a Sound Environment, and CropLife America, which were various government relations representatives for both seed companies and pesticide companies, which are often sort of intertwined with the same corporate parent.
But in following your train of thought, one of the questions to the seed companies was, can you provide untreated seed? Said, sure.
Yeah.
There's never been a demand for it. Chicken there.
Right.
But they also provide, they provide seed to Quebec.
Oh,
So they can and do.
So they would just grow more, produce more. They wouldn't.
Cope
run
fewer,
through
cope
the-
fewer seeds, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
And I guess my other question would have to do with the golf courses. What I just learned today was that 90% of bees are ground nesters, or 90% of pollinators. There was a statistic in there, right? A lot of native pollinators.
90% of Vermont's native bee species. I think,
Okay.
is the, yeah.
Are ground nesters, and therefore it's not just a couple of bees floating around a golf course, it's that they might be nesting in the golf course and affected by the neonic. So I would be hesitant to accept golf courses just because, as you said, there are alternatives, and if we've got pollinators nesting in the ground, again, we're gonna need every pollinator we can get. If we're losing them at this rate, and the rate seems to be accelerating that we're losing them, I would want to give as few exemptions as possible.
And one other thing about availability of seed being driven by states with more acreage. So far, New York has passed this. We are in line to be second. Minnesota is queued up working on a similar bill. And a lot of other states are expecting to be working on similar bills next year.
See,
So-
that's where a lot of the seed corn is grown, and it's out
Right.
there in the west.
Places like Minnesota.
Yeah, and yeah, so other questions for?
Yeah, thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So we'll be working on this, next week. We've got it on the schedule for several different, days and, I haven't got a clue what's gonna happen, but we'll give it a fair shot, and we're a little more conservative over on downstairs than upstairs, so, we'll do our best, and thanks a lot, they were good presentations, and we did have time today, the other day, was,
A lot of it.
you know, when they're giving you a fair opportunity to present, so thank you for.
I appreciate the time.
Yeah.
And certainly happy to help. in any way that I
And,
can.
you know, if we do run into questions, we may call on either of you. or-
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we hogged the time and spent, I got to spend weeks on taking testimony. So if there's questions about somebody or somebody who you can't have in or it doesn't work and you just wonder what we heard from them, always happy to. try to-
Or we can watch the videos.
Or you can watch the video.
So convenient.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, people.
So committee, I guess that'll be it for today, and,
Thank you.
so